Welcome everyone to our Lien Law Refresher and Cold Storage Lunch and Learn. This series is sponsored by Landmark Credit Union. We'll go from noon to 1 p.m. We'll leave a couple of minutes for question and answer today because we have two topics and two speakers. We'll be asking questions of our speakers at the end of each of the sessions. So our Lunch and Learn series typically highlight member companies and unique topics, timely topics, as they're brought to our attention and as we meet as a committee and come up with those that'll help your business. Today's date, again, March 23rd, 2021. Everyone on the call here today is muted. Your video is disabled. However, you do have the opportunity to chat in the chat function, raise your hand, ask a question and answer, or you can text me directly and I will be helping to moderate those questions after each one of our presenters today. Again, our Lunch and Learn presenting sponsor is Landmark Credit Union. We're also grateful to our 2021 annual sponsors. Our partner sponsor is Ergens. And we encourage our members to do business with our sponsors because these are the individuals and the companies that are supporting our industry. So just a little bit of a preview on some of the really amazing events that we have coming up. We're starting to get into nicer weather. Folks are starting to get vaccinated and feeling more comfortable with some of our small group in-person socially distanced events. So stay tuned for our April Lunch and Learn, which will feature the Milwaukee Athletic Club. We do have a CI 101 with CCIM that will be in person at the BMO Tower. That is the week of May 3rd. We also have a really unique Bayshore happy hour coming up with some of the ownership will be giving tours as well as a happy hour. If you notice, that is on Cinco de Mayo. We're also really excited about our 1 year later and 10 years beyond event where we are featuring a futurist who will talk about all things business, technology, real estate, and then we'll have a local reaction panel that will take place at the Brookfield Conference Center. And we will be offering a hybrid option for video for those who prefer not to come out for that. And then our golf, of course, starts in mid-June. Now on to our presenters. Today we have with us Marvin Bynum and CARW Muratore, both from Godfrey and Kahn, who will present on cold storage and a lien law refresher. So the format, again, is that each one of our presenters will speak and then I will facilitate a few questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Marvin.
Thanks very much, Tracy. All right, I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Just give me a second to get set up. Okay. Can everybody see that? All right. Okay, good. So first of all, thanks a lot, Tracy. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks to the whole CARW team and the board. A special shout out to Kevin Armstrong and Paul McBride with Founders 3, who were very helpful in putting this together, getting us to get involved and present today and helping us come up with a topic that we hope is, or a couple topics that we hope are relevant to everybody here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to, probably beat you guys over the head with a few too many cold related idioms. So just bear with me. I thought they were really, really clever and hilarious. And I'm sure by the time I get to like the third or fourth one, I will realize that I was totally wrong. So the first, frozen assets, trends in cold storage facility development. So just to start off and sort of break the ice here a little bit, want to talk a little bit about what factors are really pushing a growing interest in cold storage warehouse and distribution facilities. Also kind of want to talk about what makes cold storage facilities so unique, where are they being built, and what should you as brokers in helping your clients, your developers, your investors that you represent, what should you know about these facilities? And finally, will this asset class continue to be relevant in the post-COVID era? Oh, sorry, one more. Finally, what are we seeing in our market? All right, let's get going. So a cold calling. What is spurring the interest in this market segment? In the short term, I mean, everyone's thinking about and talking about, the COVID-19 vaccine rollout and the storage that's required, the cold storage requirements for the vaccine. In particular, we think about Moderna's vaccine, which is required to be stored at anywhere from 5 degrees to 13 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. And then you've got the ultra cold storage that's required for the Pfizer vaccine, anywhere from 76 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit to 112 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. I mean, it's ridiculously cold requirements. But to be honest with you, it's not just the vaccine that's spurring conversation about cold storage facilities. To be honest with you, it's food. Right now, we're, this past year, think about a year ago when you went into the grocery store and shelves were empty. Food processors, meat processing facilities were shut down. And it was something unlike we've probably seen in our lifetimes in this country, where it was difficult to just get your basic groceries. But since then, we've seen even the Department of Homeland Security has termed the cold storage facilities to be so essential to what we do, the cold food supply chain to be so essential to what we do, that they designated those facilities and the people who work there as essential infrastructure. So really the impetus for a lot of the focus on these cold storage facilities is actually food. There's been a significant uptick in online grocery shopping. There's been some consumer research that showed as of March of 2020, so right, when things are going crazy here in the middle of the pandemic, or the beginning of the pandemic, I should say, 31% of US households actually tested out and were utilizing some sort of an online grocery shopping service. And as it happens, if you sort of roll back the clock to 2018, that number was about 3%. By 2022, so by next year, the Food Marketing Institute and Nielsen Research estimate that number will be averaging out about 12 to 15% of US households will be, online grocery shopping. Fast forward even further into, almost 10 years from now, in 2030, that number goes up to 70%. So it sounds like it's something that's here to stay, the practice that we've gotten into with online grocery shopping. There's also this concept of dark kitchens or ghost kitchens. A lot of us have probably maybe I'm speaking personally here, but we've been probably eating out a lot more, a lot of food delivery services. And honestly, we're trying to support our favorite restaurants, our local restaurants here in the Milwaukee area. What you're finding is increasingly restaurants to stay in operation and to help cut costs, they're pooling the resources. They're using these dark or ghost kitchens, which aren't actually kitchens in their retail settings, but they're kitchens that are located in urban warehouses where they share kitchen resources to help cut costs, because they don't need the dining rooms anymore, or as much dining room space anymore. And that's where they're preparing the food that's being then delivered by the Grubhubs of the world and DoorDash and the like, Uber Eats. The other interesting thing that's going on in this market segment is that there's an old existing product. So cold storage is not a new dynamic. It's not something that's brand new, right? These have been around for a long time, but because they've been around for a long time, the existing product is 35 to 42 years old, depending on whose research you believe. CBRE, I think, puts it at 34 years on average. JLL says 42 years. So I mean, imagine your refrigerator in your home working for 30 to 40 years. I mean, that's just insane, right? It wouldn't last that long. So there's existing product that's very old and dated, and it's increasingly becoming obsolescent. There's also really historically a low vacancy rate. JLL research shows that there's less than 10% vacancy in cold storage facilities nationwide, and frankly, that's been okay because there hasn't been the significant demand from the other pressures. The online grocery that we're talking about, the vaccine storage and other biopharmaceuticals. But that's putting some pressure on this market segment. So what are cold storage facilities? And I say that really broadly, but there's actually a lot of different types of facilities. There are your food processing centers where the temperature is something like 55 degrees Fahrenheit. You also have your chilled warehouses where the temperatures are, hover between 32 and 33 degrees Fahrenheit. They're used to house fruits and vegetables, dry fruits, milk, other dairy products. Then you get going colder on the scale. You get your frozen warehouse where the temperatures are, maintained between 10 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit and 20 degrees below Fahrenheit. Obviously, you're putting in your frozen vegetables, your fruits, your fish, your meat, and your seafoods. There, but we also, remember we have the biopharmaceuticals that are super cold. So we've got these blast freezers and other, super freezers that are going to those extreme cold temperatures, to handle biopharmaceuticals and vaccines like the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. What makes these facilities unique? They have advanced refrigeration systems, and as part of that, there's some distinction between sort of custom solutions and spec solutions. So you don't see a lot of spec building in this market segment, at least not yet, because the design needs are so specific to individual end users. And remember, we're talking about facilities that have high-tech refrigeration systems. So you've got the significant cooling plant. A lot of the custom solutions are using the central ammonia plants. The spec solutions where you're not really sure if who the end user is going to be, so you want to have a little bit of a more versatile option. You'll see those with more packaged rooftop units. Some of them are using ammonia, some of them are using Freon. You also have very specialized building envelopes to make sure that the building and the interior of the building stays cold and regulated at the desired temperature. So as part of that, you'll see insulated metal panels, insulated ceiling panels. You'll also see underfloor insulation underneath the concrete. You'll see tall clear heights, and a lot of these buildings are 35 to 45 feet clear heights. 50 is about pretty typical as well. I've been reading about some projects where the clear height is upwards of 140 feet, which is amazing. And with that comes some pretty interesting automation and robotics. I mean, you have these delivery systems that are scaling these multiple stories to pull pallets and store pallets up at amazing heights. And the reason why they go to taller clear heights is because it's more efficient to refrigerate these buildings with a narrower footprint and a taller clear height. But you also have some pretty advanced fire suppression systems. And the reason why these are, not just your sort of typical warehouse fire suppression systems that you might have in a dry warehouse is in part because you can't have the water go through and freeze in the pipes. It's not going to do any good. And you have a lot of polyurethane insulation in these buildings. So you have some pretty specialized fire protection systems. Also, the dock areas are a little bit different than what you'd see. You have wider door spacing to accommodate sealed dock doors to keep the temperature cold inside. You also have some insulated speed doors. You want to make sure that you're not letting a bunch of cold air out every time you open up these dock doors. And I'll show you some pretty pictures here in a little bit of sort of a diagram. I think this showed up in NIOP's development magazine that gives you an idea of sort of the inner sanctums of these different buildings and how they're designed to regulate the temperature. Also, the docks are designed to be 50-inch height for refrigerated trucks to service those trucks when they're pulling up to the dock areas. And here's that picture I was just describing to you. If you can kind of see where I'm, number one is sort of the exterior dock door or dock area, and then you have sort of an inner chamber here, and those speed doors would be where number 4 is, high-speed roller doors. Again, those are designed to let as little cold air out as possible for a shorter period of time, so you can really finely tune and regulate that temperature inside. Here's an illustration of a facility, and I think this is in Illinois. This building in particular has a 72-foot clear height. It's about a 98,000 square foot freezer warehouse. It accommodates 21,000 pallets of frozen product, and they use really narrow aisles that accommodate their racking layout. And this one uses manned forklifts. I've also been seeing some examples of the automation systems that are very specialized, and I'm sure pretty expensive too. Can't quite see it probably, but these wall panels are thicker than maybe your typical warehouse exterior wall construction. These are insulated wall panels. In this particular facility, this is the same one I just showed on the previous slide. This allows the temperatures to be maintained at 10 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. So where are these things being built? Or where are they expected to be built? Frankly, that's the question, right? Yeah, we'll see activity in gateway markets, New York and LA, those huge population centers. But you're also, industry analysts also predict that you'll see these pop up in Dallas and Chicago and Atlanta. I've come across a number of articles where, I think the newest one I saw was, being developed and anticipated to come online in September of this year in Dallas, a 343,000 square foot cold storage facility down there. But that's not just those regional hubs. Also, food producing states. I mean, think about, again, back to the conversation of getting groceries to people quickly, right? I mean, I think of Amazon Fresh, which our household used, and I'm not gonna lie, I would get frustrated sometimes if I would, place my order or get ready to place my order, and I'd click on the, place order button, and it tells me that my groceries wouldn't be here until the next day. I mean, people are demanding and expecting that their groceries show up within 2 4-hour windows, right? So it makes a lot of sense to be thinking about these locations being in food producing states, close to customers, close to where the food is actually being produced. California is obviously a food producing state, Florida, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. So what are some other facts that you should know about these facilities? Not gonna lie, they're more expensive to build. I mean, everything that I've read and seen predicts or suggests that the estimate, just sort of back of the napkin number, should be 2 to 3 times higher construction costs compared to your dry warehouses. That's a significant increase in cost, right? So and that's also been a significant factor as to why up to now there hasn't been a ton of attention turned to these facilities. They've been sort of a niche market. They're also more expensive to operate. I mean, we talked a little bit about the high-tech refrigeration systems and the automation and robotics that are required to handle the material that's inside. But also the electricity cost to power these ammonia plants and these refrigeration plants. I think the estimates I saw were something like 24 to 25 cents a kilowatt hour per square foot each year versus dry warehouse, which would consume electricity at about 6 cents a square foot per year. But at the same time, again, there's low supply and there's much higher demand. Investors are starting to take notice of that, of these basic fundamentals. There's also been a significant amount of market consolidation among not only the folks who are operating them and owning them as real estate investment trusts or other PE firms, but also among the specialist operators who do cold storage as a service business. As it stands right now, there are about 4 big companies in the United States. Frankly, they're global companies, but that control about 75% of the market share here in the United States. Names that you may have heard or may be hearing from in the future: U.S. Cold Storage, Americold Realty Trust, Lineage Logistics. They're all have been on a huge buying boom in the past 18 months, gobbling up smaller operators here in the States, but also abroad, Europe, China, and consolidating their market share. And what investors are looking at is they're looking at deals where the tenants who need this cold storage space, they're credit tenants, right? They're signing up for long-term leases, 15 years or longer. Frankly, the yields are a little bit higher than you'd see in a dry warehouse investment opportunity, and it's based heavily on the strength of the tenant. So what are we going to be seeing here in our United States? Are we going to be seeing a coming Cold War? As I mentioned earlier, the anticipation is that e-commerce and online grocery shopping, it's not going away. It's going to continue. And in fact, you're seeing even grocery chains, take a harder look at whether they want to continue investing in their grocery store footprint, and whether they're going to be pivoting to a grocery storage footprint. Think of those delivery services, Amazon Fresh, for example. and Instacart. You're using a personal shopper who's, that's an expensive proposition for somebody to go to the grocery store and select your groceries and then deliver them to your house. You've got to, the grocery chain's got to pay for all the clerks and all the building operation costs. Whereas, a cold storage facility where you could have all those groceries in a more centralized location, or even a last mile location that's closer to your consumers, it might start making a little bit more sense for grocery retailers. I think we talked a little bit earlier about the numbers on where the expectation is for market saturation and as far as online grocery shopping. JLL estimates that the need for additional cold storage space by 2025, so not even a full 5 years from now, another 75 to 100 million square feet of cold storage space, which is a significant number. I think something I'd read, the e-commerce market as a whole right now in the United States is something like $500 billion. If there's that sort of need for additional space by about 100 million square feet of just cold storage space, and if we see this, usage by consumers of 15% by next year of online grocery shopping in the e-commerce channels, that represents about $150 billion of the e-commerce market. Again, the total market right now is $500 billion. So this is a significant, could be a significant market shift. Are we seeing anything here in Wisconsin? Believe it or not, we are. These are all examples that I pulled from the Milwaukee Business Journal or other publications here in our state. Just in December, Zilber acquired a 177,000 square foot cold storage warehouse in Waukesha. As of press time, they were looking for tenants for that. C.H. Coakley acquired a warehouse in Tosa in January 2021, and it's got some cold storage capabilities. We're looking at enhancing that facility as well. Central Storage and Warehouse, a company based out in the Madison area, just a couple of years ago, actually, they opened a facility in Caledonia. And you notice that I described this as a 115,000 square foot or 4 million cubic foot facility. Something I've been seeing in our research is that a lot of these warehouses are being described in cubic footage as opposed to square foot, because again, those clear height spans and trying to stack as much product as possible within that refrigerated space. Hanson Storage, another well-known local name. They've got a dry and cold storage facility out in Wauwatosa, and they've got included in that space, they've got 50,000 square foot of freezer space. And even companies like Right Height, which is obviously known for its doors and dock door capabilities and other capabilities. They're supplying these cold storage facilities with those, for example, the high speed roller doors that we talked about a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. And that is my piece. Thanks again for everyone's attention. I'm going to stop sharing, Tracy. And if anyone has any questions, I think, Tracy, you're...
Yeah. So I would encourage anyone to ask in the chat the questions. I actually have a few that I took down and a few that came in over text. So you had talked about lease terms, 15-year lease terms that were kind of driving some of these transactions. Are there specific issues that a broker should consider or know about when working with a client on one of these cold storage facilities?
That's a really good question. Actually, but my interest in this area started thinking about leasing, right? Because I think your standard industrial lease just isn't going to cut it for this type of product, right? I mean, with all the specialized equipment, there's so much that could go wrong, and who's responsible for maintaining the cooling plant, right? Who's responsible for making sure that those dock doors that are insulated and these high-speed roller doors stay in good working condition, right? So there's going to be a lot more focus on who's responsible for those maintenance, repair, and replacement items, and they come with some pretty significant dollar figures. The other thing that I've seen is that the better deals that investors are chasing have some significant tenant skin in the game, right? So they're being responsible for some of the build out of these facilities. One type of project I didn't really talk about was the sort of box in a box concept, right? So you have a large, maybe say 200,000 square foot warehouse, but within that there's 50,000 square feet that's specialized cold storage. The large facility is cold storage too, sort of broadly speaking, but the inside 50,000 square feet, there's a box within that space that has, needs and requirements to be ultra cold. In that regard, you're seeing investors chase deals where the tenant is responsible for building out the specs for that 50,000 square foot ultra cold space, right? So yeah, I think that's a great question. You're going to see a lot more focus, I think, on the maintenance obligations, the repair and replacement, and who's responsible for building these things out and fitting them out for the tenants' specialized needs.
So you talked a little bit too about the cost to construct or cost to develop a new cold storage facility. Are there existing warehouse types or existing user types that might lend themselves to some sort of retrofit, or is this just such an expensive proposition people aren't even looking at that?
Yeah, there are some. Yes, short answer is yes. But be careful, because just because you're looking at a retrofit of an existing facility doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be less expensive. Again, there's existing product out there that has been used for cold storage, right? Maybe not as cold of temps as what we're seeing, more demand for in the marketplace. But it's a lot easier to build from scratch these types of facilities, these high-tech refrigeration systems, than to retrofit. And sometimes the cost savings for retrofitting aren't as significant as you might think.
One other question along that line, when these buildings reach the end of their useful life, have you run into any situations with demising a building, or what happens when a user no longer needs the technology or capability of a cold storage?
That I haven't run into yet. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think it remains to be seen.
All right. One more question that came in. You talked a lot about vaccine and medical usage driving a lot of this demand. Are there zoning considerations or specific folks that would be that you talk to regarding this? The question really is it a biohazard concern?
Could be. It could be. I mean, I suppose that, I think you're probably more worried about the refrigerant and the material that's being used to cool the facility. You've got high quantities of ammonia, right? And some of these chemicals at a certain concentration or at a certain, when they get to a certain temperature, can be a fire hazard. So yeah, I think that certainly is something that needs to be taken into consideration, and developers of these projects need to be working hand in hand with their local planning and development offices, municipal offices, to understand, can I actually build this? Can I actually build this and have all this ammonia here, or am I running afoul of some particular laws or regulations? Yeah.
Well, I know that you continue to be a resource in this very, very timely topic. Thank you so much, Marvin. I know the slides will be available.
Yep.
And if you have other questions, folks on the call, continue to ask them in the chat. We can make sure that Marvin gets them, and I'm sure he'll be able to follow up. But now we turn our attention to Carol Muratore, who is going to talk about brokered lien law as a refresher. So I'm going to turn it over to Carol. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. And thanks to CAR and all your sponsors for sponsoring this program. Can everyone see my screen? Maybe Marvin, you can let me know. Okay. We were asked to talk about broker lien laws, just really as a refresher, and especially for brokers who don't have attorneys necessarily in-house who they can ask questions they have when they're essentially, not getting paid. We know that you'd prefer not to file a lien against an owner's property. It's not really good for business or future referrals, but you should know how to preserve your lien rights just in case you do run into trouble. So what I'm going to go over is the who, what, when, where, and it all starts out with and is governed by the Wisconsin statutes, and it's this section 779.32. And as long as you're a Chapter 452 licensed real estate broker, you have the right to file a lien against a property if you aren't paid your commission. So what kinds of property can be subjected to a broker lien? It really is any commercial property. There are certain specific exceptions in the statutes. You can't place a lien on a real property that contains 8 or fewer dwelling units. And if it's zoned residential, even if it's zoned residential, if there are no structures on it, even if there's, then you can't file a lien against it. And then if it's zoned agricultural, you're not able to place a lien against it. So the requirements for you to be able to file a lien are a written agreement, and we'll go through each of these in more detail in the future slides. The initial notice of lien rights you have to give to the owner. You have to record a notice of interest, and you have to actually record the lien in order to perfect the lien. And after that's recorded, then you have to mail a copy of it to the owner. So first and key, of course, is that there needs to be a written agreement entitling you to your commission. And there's all sorts of different written agreements for brokers that are described in the statutes. Of course, there's a listing agreement when you plan to sell or lease a property for an owner. Also, real estate buyer agency agreements. And if you represent a tenant, your tenant representation agreement. If you have an agreement with an owner to manage their property or to find tenants for the property, any of those written agreements can include the necessary language and can be the basis for you to be entitled to a commission. One thing that has come up in the past, I know Marvin and I have each gotten calls at times. Someone is representing a tenant, for example, and they bring a tenant to an owner and the listing broker, and they ask us if they can file a lien against the owner's property. Well, if you didn't have a written agreement, the tenant representation agreement or an agreement with the other broker, you would not be able to file a lien even though you brought that tenant. So just the writing, having it in writing is really important. So the first step to make sure that you'd be able to file a lien is to give an initial notice of the lien rights. And that initial notice needs to be included in the written document. So within your listing agreement or tenant agency agreement or management agreement. And the Wisconsin statutes actually have a specific statement written out that is the statement that you need to include in that written agreement. Essentially just putting the owner on notice that you have the authority to file this lien against the property that's the subject of the listing. The WB commercial listing agreement form has the notice of lien pre-printed in there, so you're covered there. If you have a buyer agency agreement, tenant rep agreement, or if you have an agreement, management agreement or agreement to help an owner lease their property, if it's not on a standard form, it's a lawyer presented a form representing the owner, you just need to make sure that it does have this statutory language in it, the statement, putting the owner on notice that you do have these lien rights under Wisconsin statutes. And then the second step would be to record a notice of interest. So this isn't yet recording the lien itself, but just recording a notice of your interest in the property and that you have this lien right. And the notice needs to include the names of the parties, the broker name and the owner's name, the date of that written agreement that gave the right to the lien, so date of your listing agreement, the legal description of the real property on which you want to be able to file the lien. And of course, that notice needs to be in Wisconsin recordable form. You will record it in the Register of Deeds office where that commercial real estate is located. And when to record really depends on the type of agreement that's involved. The statutes are specific about when you need to record for commercial listing agreement for a sale or a buyer agency agreement. Needs to be at least 30 days before the recording of the deed, so before closing. The statutes aren't as specific and they don't specify when you need to record this notice of interest when it is you just have a listing to lease property or a management agreement. In general, it is customary to be at least 90 days after either you earn that commission or you receive the notice from the owner, or otherwise that you have are entitled to that commission. You know, it's often when lease is signed, sometimes part of the commission is due upon signature and part later on, or if you have an agreement that allows for you to earn a commission upon a renewal of a lease, it would be at least 90 days after you earn the commission. Oops. Sorry about that. Then the next step would be to record and perfect the commission lien itself. There is the Wisconsin Realtors Association broker commission lien form that includes all of the requirements that need to be on that document. But the requirements are of course, your name, your license number, the name of the property owner, the legal description of that property, and then the amount of the lien at recording. So not including any interest that might accrue, but whatever the original amount of the lien is. And then it would need to be signed by you, and your signature would need to be notarized. But even after recording it, they want to make sure that the owner themselves has gotten the notice, because they wouldn't necessarily know when something was recorded against their property. So the statutes require you to mail a copy of the lien itself, the lien document itself, to the owner within 72 hours after you've recorded the lien document. And of course, the recording should be in the Register of Deeds office of the county in which the property is located. If you end up needing to foreclose a lien, it's a process under Chapter 846 of the Wisconsin statutes. I am not going into the details on that for this presentation. We thought we'd also summarize just a few cases that are of note and have been cited in future cases even already since the date of these. One of them, the first one, the Ash Park case, there was a vacant land listing agreement that had been entered into, but the transaction did not close. The seller sued the buyer for specific performance, and amazingly, because specific performance usually isn't granted, specific performance was granted in this case. But then the buyer still didn't comply with the specific performance, and the buyer and seller ended up settling on an agreed amount that the buyer paid in lieu of actually purchasing the property. The broker then sued the seller for its commission. And since the listing contract included the language that's in the standard WB5 commercial listing, saying that a broker earns a commission if the seller sells or accepts an offer which creates an enforceable contract for sale. The court determined that since the contract, the sale contract, was deemed to be enforceable by the courts, and they deemed it enforceable and granted the specific performance remedy, that the broker did indeed earn their commission, and the broker was the seller was obligated to pay it. Another case that has that shows the importance of certain language that's in the standard listing contract is the Sande versus Dave Kohl agency case. In this one, the broker had a listing to sell a certain parcel of property. It didn't end up getting sold, but instead the municipality foreclosed on it. They condemned the property and title was paid to the governmental entity. In this case, the court decided that the operative language in the listing agreement was the provision that indicates that the broker would earn a commission once the transaction occurs, which causes an effective change in ownership or control of the property. And here, since the government got control of the property, that ownership changed to the government, the court held that the broker did earn their commission. And so the seller and the one who was condemned upon did have to pay the commission due to the broker under the listing agreement. So those are the nuts and bolts and the steps to be able to file a lien against an owner's property so you can get paid. We had already received a question yesterday, so I just thought I'd start out the question section by answering this person's question. The broker asked if an automatic renewal of a listing contract would affect the broker's ability to file a lien on a property or the enforceability of the lien. And it would not negatively affect your ability to file a lien or the enforceability of the lien. You would still have those lien rights. You'd want to make sure that the original listing contract included the notice that's required and that you file the notice of interest and follow all the steps that are required in order to perfect or get a valid lien against the property, but you definitely would still, the renewal itself would not negatively affect your ability to file the lien or the enforceability of the lien. And then I think Tracy was going to come on if there were any questions.
Yeah, and I mean, this is such great content, and I think it's very specific. I think it's very timely. So if others have questions, please put them in the chat. Feel free to text me or use the question and answer feature. So to that end, we did get a very specific question about the right to file a lien and when would that expire. So the example was a lease was signed a year ago. The broker still hasn't received the payment, but has not yet filed a lien. How would you answer that?
Yeah, you would still have your lien rights. So just follow through on the steps, and hopefully the original written listing agreement was on one of the standard forms that includes the statutory language that's required, the notice language, and then you just start doing taking each of the steps. So that initial notice of the lien rights in the written agreement, and then recording the notice of interest, and followed by the actual recording of the lien itself.
Okay, so there is no time constraint. So even a year, it can be 5 years?
You know, from what I have read, there isn't a statute of limitations on when you can file it. So my understanding is that you can file it as long as your commission is still outstanding.
Got it. So one of the reasons this was so interesting, I think, for some of our members, and we've talked a little bit about this, is obviously with the pandemic, there were lots of changes, lots of people moving around, a lot of leases that were being re-looked at, or maybe there were some other negotiations. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what you saw in this space, and if there would be greater concern for enforcing some sort of broker lien law or opening up a complaint?
Well, I didn't have any particular brokers approach me with problems, but I do know that there were a lot of negotiations going on, and some of the things that I saw, like with leasing, was the landlords and the tenant entered into an agreement to or amend their agreement to extend the lease term and get a few months, April and May of 2020 were rent free, but then tacking on a few months at the end. Most of the sales that were going on that I saw did continue through. So it really would just depend on the facts of the case and the situation.
So do you expect that in the coming months, since people were doing, maybe a 1 year or an 18 month, do you expect that we're going to see some kind of movement here, or are you hearing that things are going pretty much as planned?
You may want to do some due diligence online with respect to the owners or the sellers, and especially in the leasing context. If you know of a building that's owned by a particular entity or person who you've seen, or if you do some research and find that they're in some financial distress, that you think perhaps that building might be sold and you're still owed a commission in connection with a tenant that you brought to that building, or if you were even, of course, the listing broker for the leasing of that building, then you'd want to start putting the pieces in place in order to perfect your lien and to get those notices of record in addition to the lien itself, just so that when that property, if they do end up selling it, or if it is foreclosed upon, that your lien is properly filed against the property so that you'll get paid when that sale occurs. So I could see it and would recommend kind of doing that due diligence if you think that your owner or seller may be headed that direction.
No, I think that's great. We have another one. What's the best way for a tenant rep broker, so not the listing broker, if possible, to obtain or protect their lien rights? Because in a lot of these cases, we've got kind of two different sides here coming to the table. So what do you recommend?
Yeah. Well, having getting a written agreement in place, whether it's directly with the owner, would be ideal, and it would need to include that the initial notice of lien rights within the document, a tenant agency agreement. That would be a good way to do it, and it would be understandable in these times. I know it's not something that historically necessarily brokers in Wisconsin have been doing, when the times are good and the market's solid, but that would be, you need to do that or have a written agreement, with the listing broker. But in that case, that wouldn't entitle you to file the lien against the owner's property. It really needs to be an agreement with the owner themselves in order to be able to file the lien. So.
Well, and that leads to a kind of another consideration with a lot of sublease activity going on. Is there anything that you would kind of caution any of our members to look for or look out for, or is there a state form that you'd recommend we kind of look into, or what do you think?
There is an addendum form that you can attach to if you have an agreement with the owner, and if you had a management or agreement or an agreement to lease that didn't have the notice in it, you could attach that before it's signed. But I will get back to you if there's another form that I'd recommend, but I don't know offhand.
No, and I think that's a good reminder that when COVID, the COVID interruptions were taking place. And this was even as early as late March, there was that COVID form that was put forth through the WRA. And I know you referenced the WRA.
Yeah.
We take for granted sometimes in Wisconsin how much work is done around broker lien law and the rights that are afforded to the brokers. Are you able to speak a little bit to what is different about Wisconsin relative to other states, or even just generally kind of the environment that we work within?
Yeah. It's, you're right that it was interesting in doing that research that so few states really give brokers this right, real estate brokers this right. It's, only about a fourth of the states out there. So, so it is something that it's good that we've had the advocacy of CARW and the broker community in order to get this legislation and to be able to have these rights. So I know brokers hesitate to take the steps, but you may just want to consider it in these times. So.
When I give it one last question, obviously you come to us with a wealth of knowledge, and especially in such crazy times when things are changing a mile a minute, and we appreciate you putting together all of this great information. Any last words on what we should be thinking about or looking at, and maybe when we should know to say, okay, we need to pick up the phone and give Carol a call or give Marvin a call, because really time is money and mistakes are not acceptable here.
Right. It certainly is. If you're managing property or you're leasing a building and it's months and months are going by where your invoices are not getting paid, the best practice is, of course, to, still invoice them monthly for those types of leasing and management arrangements. But just keeping a close eye on the receivables and the dating, and making sure that you take the steps to protect yourself or in order to ensure that you don't get into a difficult spot where all of a sudden you're reading in the paper that that building was sold and you didn't, your commissions were outstanding and you're out of luck. So yeah, I think it's just being vigilant, especially in these times.
No, I think that's great. Carol, Muratore, Marvin, Bynum, thank you so much for all of your insights and your expertise. I know that these slides will be available. Today's session was recorded, and your contact information is available. And I saw some movement in the chat here, so I think you might have some people reaching out.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy, and thanks, everyone.
Yeah.